Good morning, church. It's good to gather with you today in your living room or in your office, or maybe you're just out on a walk and listening and watching on your phone. There are many ways that we can connect, and I'm so glad for this opportunity where we can spend time together in worship. And that looks different today than it did a few months ago, but I'm so glad that we can continue to be flexible and creative as far as what that looks like. So in light of that, it should come as no surprise to you that I and many others like me have been spending a lot of time online these days. Now, this is not a picture of what my desk looks like. I don't know who this person is that can keep such a neat and tidy desk and still be doing work. Also, green things don't tend to survive in my presence, at least inside the house. So maybe this is my dream desk, but at this point is not quite it. But this does remind me of where we are at these days, spending a lot of time in front of the computer screen. And I don't know about you, but I read a lot of articles and to enjoy the lighter side, I read some memes, look at some memes on the internet that they ring true, but there's also some humor behind it. And there's one word that comes up quite often to describe this time, and that's the word apocalypse. Now, I don't know if I would say it necessarily matches our time in the sense of the way we use the word today. Often this word apocalypse is used to describe a sort of end of the world scene. And in some of these memes that I've seen, you see the people from some dystopian future drama TV show next to a person wearing a bathrobe and sitting on their couch and saying, "This is not the apocalypse outfit I thought I was going to be wearing." I find those quite humorous, so I invite you to look those up online. But there's something about this word that I think is really important, that we can really grasp onto. But it's not our current usage of this word of end of the world. Apocalypse, in its original usage, meant a revealing. This idea of things being revealed that were not previously known or which could not be known except for what is happening in that moment. I like to visualize this as being like a curtain on a stage. And as the show begins, the curtain is unveiled to reveal what is going on behind the curtain. And the times that we are in today, I think, are very revealing. In a positive way, we see people coming together, communities coming together to do good work. We see people adapting in times of crisis in new ways to respond to the needs of others, to adapt their ways of operating so that we can keep each other safe and healthy. And honestly, as I look around town, I see people walking and biking a lot more. And that just really gets me excited, being able to see my neighbors and connect with them on a new level. Because we spend most of our time at home and we're not just getting in our car and driving away to work and coming back and hardly seeing the sun, we have this opportunity to connect. And I think this is really positive and fun. But there's a flip side to that. Some ways in which I think some disappointing realities are being revealed in this time. And I think it would be irresponsible not to name those for what they are. One of these realities, I think, is in a lack of awareness or willingness to think beyond ourselves and to do what needs to be done for the common good. I see this evident in different protests that are happening around this country, like the one depicted above, that are protesting public health measures and stay-at-home orders. I see this in the way that partisan politics and power plays continue to take place on both sides of the aisle. I long to see our public figures work together in times of crisis, especially. I mean, I'd love that all the time, but especially now, it's time to come together, work together. All people. Our political leaders are no exception to that. I think it's also been revealed that while we have excellent doctors and nurses and medical professionals in this country, the for-profit medical system has left millions without health care, without access to health insurance when they lost their jobs. And within this for-profit system, this leaning into a way of efficiency has actually created a scarcity in the supplies that are needed, all in the name and perhaps the idol of efficiency. Finally, the other thing that I think is being revealed, and I know this is treading into awkward territory, but that many Christians in this country act and view themselves as American first, concerned more with their rights and freedoms than the way of Christ that is defined by a willingness to give up one's rights for the benefit of others. I hope in this moment you haven't turned off your TV or thrown your phone across the room. I've said these things because I think they're important for us to name as followers of Christ. Some may think they sound far too political, but my reason for bringing them up is not a political nature. I'm not arguing for one party or another. This is not about partisan politics. I bring this up because these are human issues. These are issues of the human heart and issues of individual and systemic sin in our world. I am genuinely concerned about what is being revealed about us, about who we are and what we value in this time. And I think this is especially important because it connects with who or what we trust. Our actions reflect our trust. And so it begins to call into question for me, who or what do we trust? I chose the title of the sermon, if you've been paying attention to the bulletin, very carefully. It is a phrase that appears on our money in this country. In God we trust. I think this kind of actually represents the fuzziness of our lives in which we talk about the importance of the separation of church and state, and yet they're never completely separated. It's good that we try and separate these in the sense of power over one another or a collusion that can lead to injustice. But we cannot deny that they can have influence over one another. And unfortunately, I think a lot of my concern these days comes from the reality that the influence is heading in the wrong direction. That the political world's influence over the church is not being challenged within our churches. Now, you might be thinking right now, hey, Clayton, stay in your lane. But when it comes to faith and following Jesus, I have some insight to share. And since it's right there on the money, that phrase, in God we trust, and people are invoking Jesus' name to justify very un-Christ-like actions, it seems that there's an invitation for those lanes to merge. And that fuzziness appears actually in this Bible story that we heard today. And we experience two examples of the outworking of trust. Although in classic Luke fashion, the roles almost seem reversed. Besides Jesus, there are essentially two characters in this story. There's the centurion and the Jewish elders. Let's look at a little bit closely at who those characters are and what they represent. The centurion first, he represents part of the Roman Empire, which is an occupying force that has conquered and ruling over the Jewish people and other groups in that area. He is one, as Danae said, who has command over 100, a position of power, authority, and honor. He likely, because of this, became rich, often off the backs of those who are being occupied and oppressed. But we do hear that he used at least some of those funds to help build a local synagogue. We also know that he has a servant or slave, depending on your translation, who is highly honored in his household and is seen to be dying. Now, we don't know a whole lot about this slave, but I do find it interesting to think of, where did this slave come from? Most of the time, slaves are either there because of financial loss, which could be at the hands of the centurion, or they're there because they were a conquered people and were taken as a slave. It's interesting the way we see then the other character react in this story. The Jewish elders. Now, they are recipients, we can assume, of the centurion's financial assistance. But unlike the centurion that seems to be aware of Jesus' mission and work in the world, these synagogue leaders seem to be unaware, or at least are not talking about it. There's no mention of Jesus' care for the lowly or his ability to heal. This was seen often in Jesus' world, and yet they make no mention of that as to a reason why Jesus should help out this poor slave. We do notice, though, in what they say, that they reflect kind of the classic first century patron and client relationship. The patron being the centurion and the client being the Jewish elders. This relationship that they kind of have is a sort of you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back situation. The centurion builds them a synagogue, and therefore they are expected to repay that great patronage with honor and favors. So that's likely why they approached Jesus in the way that they did, saying, hey, this guy did something great for us. You should really help him out. That was part of their way of repaying this man for his generosity. But it's interesting that the centurion and Jesus seem to dismiss this altogether. In the second conversation that happens through emissaries between Jesus and the centurion is not based on a patron-client relationship. It sounds much more like somebody who is already bought in to what Jesus is all about. In fact, the centurion is even willing to give up his right to go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants and to honor the customs of Jesus and Jesus' people. He surrenders this right and honors Jesus, speaking through these emissaries or intermediaries. Because in that time, it would have been shameful for Jesus to enter the home of a Gentile. Knowing this, the centurion willingly adapts, willingly tries something else. And in all this, Jesus responds with amazement to the centurion's faith. And the crazy thing about this is that this is the only time that Jesus is amazed at somebody's faith in a positive light. The other times when we see Jesus amazed at someone's faith, it's their lack of faith that he's amazed by. Again, Luke is switching the roles around to catch our attention. Now, I think it's important that we're not too hard on the Jewish leaders in this story. That's led to some anti-Semitism in the past. But we have to recognize that the role that they play in this story is opposite of what Jesus is going for, and is perhaps offering a challenge to us and our way of living and our way of showing who we trust. So let's talk about what this looks like in the age of COVID-19. Because if we truly trust God, I think these things will start coming more easily to us if we live into that and lean into that trust that we have in our God. So here's some very straightforward ways, though not necessarily always easy ways, that we can do this. One, I think we can reflect Jesus' willingness to surrender our own preferences for the good of others. Amen. To be honest, I'm pretty embarrassed by churches that are more concerned with their religious freedom than they are the health of their communities. I'm so glad to be a part of a church that when we first started hearing about how bad this was going to be, we were willing and able to switch up the way we do things and make space, make time, and put in the energy to help our community and our congregations stay safe and healthy. This is a very important role in which the church plays. Also, I think we have to recognize that even though we are giving up perhaps some of our rights to freedom, we still have the freedom to advocate for those who need help the most right now. Those who have lost jobs, livelihoods, health insurance, and more. We have a great opportunity here to do something for our community, for the people in need around us. And I hope that we'll continue to seek and find what that might mean, even if it means we have to give something up for it to happen. Second, I think we can be the church in addition to just tuning into church. One of the things that I felt really personally challenged by is this idea that in this time, we can very easily tune in on a Sunday morning and consume church and then go about our lives. We don't have that same opportunity to serve and to connect within the congregational space. And I think Sunday mornings are great, and I'm glad that we can continue to live stream and that our service still happens. But that's never what church has been meant to be. We are to be a people of love and grace. The metaphor that came to mind as I was thinking about this is this idea of a swimming pool. Maybe it's because my neighbors are putting one in next door, and I'm really excited to maybe sneak in there. But I think a worship service can be like a diving board that you jump off of, and the rest of life is the swimming pool. Maybe the first time you dove, or maybe you see a child going on the diving board for the first time, and that you kind of stand there almost frozen. If all we do is tune into church on a Sunday morning, we're frozen on that diving board. We've got to jump in. We've got to trust that God is with us. And the way that God has trained us and equipped us, just like our swimming instructors have trained us and equipped us to survive in a pool, that we too will do good things and be a part of what God is doing in our world. We hear a lot about God's love for people. I've heard it several times in this service alone. But we become the church when we actually live that out. And we become the church when we extend grace to one another. When we extend grace to the neighbor who's super annoying. When we extend grace to those who maybe aren't doing what we're doing, but we can do it anyway. Third, I think we can take what has been revealed about ourselves and our society, the things that I've named earlier in this sermon, and we can learn from them. I've heard that some anticipate that after all of this is over, and it's even starting now a little bit, that there will be a big push for things to go back to normal, and to do that as soon as possible. But as far as I'm concerned, that's just arrogance and foolishness. Our world has changed. We've lost many people in our country and in our world, in the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe by the time this is all over into the millions. But we can learn from this. We can grow. We can become a better people. Amen. And we as the church can be the catalyst for that. It's time that we as the church, like the prophets of old, speak truth to power. Act truth to power. Show that we can be humble, that we can learn from our shortfalls, that we can be God's people, and we can be agents of God's kingdom in our world today. Now, I'll be honest, this probably wasn't the most comforting of sermons, and I'm willing to accept that. And I'm willing to accept that I may have pushed a few buttons along the way. But I hope that you will hear this one thing, that because we trust in God, and trust that God has equipped us and prepared us to be the kinds of people that this world needs, that we will be willing, maybe even excited, to lay down our rights, to lay down whatever it takes, so that we may see the common good and God's kingdom reign on earth as it is in heaven. Lord, give us strength, show us mercy, and may we abide in your grace. Amen.